All right, so you sent over this 5-day fluency guide, and at first glance, honestly, it sounded like one of those things that promises you'll be fluent by Friday, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But flipping through it, I see it's more about smart habits, not cramming.
Right.
I'm really curious to dig into this, especially day 1,
Right.
which is all about listening and pronunciation.
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
What's interesting is it really seems to align with how we naturally learn languages.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we don't give toddlers grammar textbooks.
No.
They just sort of absorb everything through immersion, right?
That's true. That's how we all start.
And this guide seems to tap into that same process.
Yeah, it's fascinating how it mirrors natural language acquisition.
And when you think about it, we all understood spoken language way before we ever even opened a dictionary.
Totally. It's the foundation.
So getting into the nitty-gritty of day 1,
Good.
the first thing they emphasize is picking the right listening material.
Right.
It needs to be engaging, obviously, but also at the right level.
Yes.
Like a good workout, challenging, but not totally demoralizing.
I like that analogy.
They suggest things like the British Council podcast,
Yeah, those are good.
TED Talks, even sitcoms like Friends got a shout out.
Interesting.
What are your thoughts on those? Anything you'd add to that list?
I think they're on the right track.
Okay.
For beginners, podcasts designed specifically for English learners
Okay.
can be a great starting point. The BBC has some excellent ones.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a ton of great independent creators out there, too.
I bet.
What's key is finding something you actually like,
Right. It has to hold your attention.
Exactly.
Okay.
Whether it's history, true crime, or even a podcast about podcasts.
Yeah.
Aligning the content with your interests
Makes sense?
makes the learning process way more enjoyable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I can definitely see how that would make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Now they talk about active versus passive listening.
Okay.
It seems pretty straightforward. But is there more to it than just whether you're paying close attention?
There's definitely a subtle but important distinction.
Okay, I'm listening.
Passive listening, like having English playing in the background while you work,
Gotcha.
that's valuable for familiarizing yourself with the sounds of the language.
Makes sense.
But active listening, that's where the real magic happens.
Okay, so active listening is more like a focused training.
It is. Think of it as training for your ears.
Okay, so how would someone actually practice active listening?
Well, you might listen to a short audio clip
All right.
and really try to pick out key words.
Okay.
Jot them down as you go.
Gotcha.
If a word trips you up,
Yeah.
you rewind, replay,
Okay.
and really try to grasp it.
So you're actively working to decode the message.
Exactly. You're not just passively hearing the words.
Now there's this technique they call shadowing,
Yes. Shadowing.
which caught my eye.
It's a good one.
It sounds kind of intense, though.
Well,
You're
yeah.
basically mimicking a native speaker,
Right?
trying to match their pronunciation, speed, everything.
Everything. Intonation, rhythm, the whole package.
Have you ever used this or worked with people who have?
Oh, yeah. Shadowing is incredibly effective.
Really?
It might feel strange at first,
I can imagine.
but there's a reason it works. Research has shown that it can significantly improve pronunciation and fluency.
Wow, so there's actual science behind it.
There is.
But how do you go about shadowing effectively? Is it just repeating what you hear?
It's a little more nuanced than just parroting. You're trying to embody the speaker's delivery.
Okay.
You're paying really close attention to the subtleties of their pronunciation,
Yeah.
their intonation, even their pauses and breaths.
So you're trying to capture the music of their speech.
Yes.
Not just the words themselves.
Exactly. And that's how you start to internalize those subtle aspects of pronunciation.
I can see how that would help someone sound truly fluent.
Right.
Now, the guide also dives into some of those sounds
Oh.
that tend to trip up English learners.
Look.
Like the infamous TH sound.
Ah, yes. The TH.
It gets everyone.
It does. It's a tricky one.
It's comforting to know that even those of us who are comfortable with the language,
Yeah,
we still have our pronunciation nemesis.
of course.
So besides TH, what are some other sounds that tend to cause trouble?
Oh, there are quite a few. Distinguishing between R and L can be tricky,
Right.
as well as mastering those subtle vowel sounds.
Oh, yeah, those are tough.
That can sound so similar to an untrained ear.
Right, like ship and sheep.
Exactly.
I remember mixing those up constantly when I first started learning English.
Those are what we call minimal pairs.
Minimal pair.
Words that differ by just one sound.
Interesting.
They're the bane of many a language learner's existence.
Haha.
But they're also a fantastic tool for improving pronunciation.
They're like the secret weapon of pronunciation training.
You could say that.
Mastering those subtle distinctions
Yes.
is crucial for being understood clearly.
Very much so.
The guide suggests focusing on minimal pair practice,
Okay.
listening to and repeating them to train your ear and your tongue.
It's a great way to fine-tune your pronunciation.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like doing targeted exercises for your pronunciation muscles.
It is.
Now, the guide also mentions keeping a daily pronunciation journal.
Oh, yes.
Is that basically just recording yourself speaking for a minute each day?
It's a bit more than just recording.
Okay,
The idea is to listen back to that recording
gotcha.
with a critical ear
Okay.
and identify one specific thing you want to improve.
So one thing each day.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe you notice you're stressing the wrong syllable in a certain word, or that your intonation falls flat at the end of sentences.
Right.
Whatever it is, you focus on that one element for the day.
So it's like setting a mini pronunciation challenge for yourself each day,
Exactly.
rather than trying to tackle everything at once.
Right. It feels much more manageable that way.
I like that. It feels manageable and less overwhelming.
And by keeping a journal, you can track your progress and celebrate those wins.
It's incredibly motivating to see those small improvements.
It is.
It's like seeing those tiny muscle gains at the gym.
I like that analogy.
But for your pronunciation skills.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with day one.
We have.
Active listening, shadowing, minimal pairs, even a pronunciation journal.
Yeah, it's a good foundation.
Before we move on, would you mind recapping what you see as the most important takeaways from this first day?
Sure. I think the key takeaway is that fluency begins with training your ear.
Okay.
The more you immerse yourself in the sounds of English,
Yeah.
the more naturally you'll start to understand and speak it.
So it's about building that foundational listening comprehension
Yes.
that underpins everything else.
Exactly.
And then by actively mimicking native speakers through shadowing,
Right.
you're internalizing those pronunciation patterns and rhythms that make someone sound genuinely fluent.
You're absorbing the music of the language.
And by consciously working on those tricky sounds that might be new to you, you're essentially smoothing out any pronunciation bumps in the road.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like giving yourself a pronunciation tune-up.
I love it.
So it's all about training your ear, mimicking native speakers,
Yes.
and then fine-tuning those pronunciation details.
Great at it.
And the beauty of this approach is that it's all about building small, sustainable habits.
Right.
It's not about cramming or overwhelming yourself with hours of study,
Oh,
but rather making those consistent daily efforts that compound over time.
that's the key. Consistency over intensity.
I love that. It's like building a muscle, but for your English fluency.
Exactly. And just like with physical exercise, the key is to find a routine that you enjoy and can stick with.
So true. Now, from your experience, are there any common mistakes you see English learners make when it comes to pronunciation?
One mistake I often see is focusing too much on individual sounds in isolation
Okay.
rather than the overall flow of speech. English is a stress-timed language,
Right.
which means that the rhythm is determined by the emphasis we place on certain words and syllables.
So it's not just about pronouncing each word perfectly, but also about getting that rhythmic flow,
Exactly.
that natural ebb and flow of stressed and unstressed syllables.
Yes, that musicality.
And that's where shadowing can be so helpful.
It is.
By mimicking the delivery of native speakers.
Right.
You're intuitively absorbing those stress patterns.
And incorporating them into your own speech.
It's like learning to dance to the beat of the language.
Love that analogy.
And speaking of rhythm, we can't forget about intonation,
Of course not.
which, as we mentioned earlier, is the rise and fall of your voice as you speak.
Right.
Intonation adds another layer of complexity to English pronunciation,
It does.
but it also makes the language incredibly expressive.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like the punctuation of spoken language.
I like that.
It can completely change the meaning of a sentence,
For sure.
depending on how it's used.
Exactly.
A simple phrase like "thank you"
Yeah.
can convey a multitude of emotions depending on the intonation.
It can.
It can express genuine gratitude,
Right.
polite formality, or even sarcasm.
You got it.
So how can learners develop a better understanding of English intonation patterns?
Once again, shadowing is key.
Really? Again.
It's that powerful.
Okay.
Pay close attention to how native speakers use their voices
Yeah.
to convey emotion, emphasis, and meaning.
Right.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
Oh, good point.
Exaggerating those rising and falling tones.
Okay.
Just to get a feel for how they shape the overall delivery.
It's like playing with different vocal expressions in front of a mirror.
It is. And the more you practice, the more natural it will become.
This is all incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm already starting to think about pronunciation in a whole new way.
That's great to hear. Remember, fluency is a journey, not a destination.
It's about enjoying the process and celebrating those small victories along the way.
Exactly. And with consistent effort and the right approach, you'll be amazed at how much progress you can make.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
From the importance of active listening to mastering those pesky TH sounds.
Yeah.
Not to mention minimal pairs and the power of shadowing.
It's a lot to take in.
But we're just getting started, folks.
Yeah.
Remember, this is just day 1 of the 5-day fluency guide.
That's right.
Now, before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to pose a question to you, our listener.
All right, let's hear it.
Think about what we've discussed today.
Okay.
What's one small change you're willing to make to your listening habits?
Good question.
Maybe you'll try out the shadowing technique.
Yeah.
Explore a new podcast for English learners.
That's a great idea.
Or challenge yourself with some minimal pair practice.
Good one.
Whatever it is, take that first step and see the difference it makes.
You won't regret it.
And remember, fluency isn't something that happens overnight.
Definitely not.
It's about building those consistent habits that compound over time.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
So keep listening, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep having fun with English.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
You got this.
We believe in you. And let's not forget that pronunciation journal.
Oh, right.
Just taking a few minutes each day to record yourself speaking.
Okay.
And then listening back with a critical ear.
Yeah.
It can be incredibly revealing, you know?
It's amazing how much we can learn by listening to ourselves.
It is.
Sometimes we don't even realize how we're pronouncing certain words
Isn't that right?
until we hear them played back.
Exactly. It's like holding a mirror up to your speech.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And the more aware you become of your own pronunciation patterns,
Right.
the more control you'll have over how you sound.
It's like shining a spotlight on those little habits that might be holding you back.
Exactly. And once you identify those habits,
Yeah.
you can start to consciously change them.
I'm really impressed with this guide.
Me too.
It breaks down what can seem like this massive goal of fluency
Yeah.
into such manageable, bite-sized steps.
Right.
It makes the whole process feel much less intimidating.
I agree. It's all about empowering learners.
Okay.
By showing them that fluency isn't some mystical achievement,
Right.
but rather a series of small, achievable steps.
And those small steps build on each other,
They do.
creating momentum over time.
It's like a snowball effect.
It's encouraging to see that laid out so clearly in this guide.
I agree.
Now, I'm curious about something.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about mimicking native speakers.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that risk someone losing their own unique voice or accent?
That's a great question. And it's a concern I've heard from learners before.
Okay.
The goal of mimicking native speakers isn't to erase your individuality,
Right.
but rather to acquire the tools and techniques that allow you to express yourself clearly and effectively in English.
Okay.
Your accent is part of who you are, and it's valuable.
Right.
But by mastering the nuances of pronunciation and intonation, you're essentially expanding your vocal toolbox.
So it's like adding new colors to your palette,
Exactly.
not replacing the ones you already have.
And the more you practice,
Yeah.
the more naturally you'll be able to blend those colors,
Okay.
creating a unique and authentic voice that reflects who you are.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'm glad.
It's about embracing your own voice
Yeah.
while also acquiring the skills to navigate the nuances of English pronunciation.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Now, you mentioned earlier that English is a stress-timed language.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on what that means?
Of course. So in stress-timed languages like English,
Okay.
the rhythm of speech is determined by the emphasis we place on certain words and syllables.
Okay.
And these stressed syllables tend to occur at roughly equal intervals,
Interesting.
which gives the language its characteristic flow.
Okay.
This contrasts with syllable-timed languages,
Right.
where each syllable is given equal time regardless of stress.
So it's not just about pronouncing each word correctly,
It's not just about that.
but also about getting that rhythmic flow,
Yes.
that natural ebb and flow of stressed and unstressed syllables.
That's a big part of it.
And that's where shadowing can be particularly helpful. By mimicking the delivery of native speakers, you're intuitively absorbing those stress patterns
Right.
and incorporating them into your own speech.
It's a subconscious process.
It's like learning to dance to the beat of the language.
Exactly.
And speaking of rhythm,
What about it?
we can't forget about intonation,
Oh, right. Intonation.
which, as we mentioned earlier, is the rise and fall of your voice as you speak.
Yeah,
Intonation adds another layer of complexity to English pronunciation,
for sure.
but it also makes the language incredibly expressive.
It does, doesn't it?
It's like the punctuation of spoken language.
I like that.
It can completely change the meaning of a sentence depending on how it's used.
You're absolutely
A
right.
simple phrase like "thank you"
Yeah, a classic example.
can convey a multitude of emotions depending on the intonation.
It really can.
It can express genuine gratitude, polite formality, or even sarcasm.
Exactly.
So how can learners develop a better understanding of English intonation patterns?
Again, I recommend shadowing.
Shadowing, again.
It really is that versatile.
Okay.
Pay close attention to how native speakers use their voices to convey emotion, emphasis, and meaning.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
I like that.
Try exaggerating those rising and falling tones just to get a feel for how they shape the overall delivery.
It's like playing with different vocal expressions in front of a mirror.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more natural it will become. You'll start to internalize those patterns and use them instinctively.
This is all incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm gaining a much deeper appreciation for the complexities of English pronunciation.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a fascinating aspect of language.
It really is.
And it plays such a crucial role in effective communication.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to day 2 of the 5-day fluency guide,
Okay.
I'd like to address something some of our listeners might be thinking.
Right.
We've talked a lot about the importance of pronunciation and fluency,
Yes, we have.
but what about grammar?
Grammar.
Isn't that essential too?
That's an excellent point. And it's something I get asked about all the time.
Okay.
Grammar is undoubtedly important for clear and effective communication.
Right.
However, I believe that focusing too much on grammar rules
Yeah.
in the early stages of language learning can be counterproductive.
Oh, interesting.
It can lead to hesitation, fear of making mistakes,
I see.
and ultimately hinder fluency.
So you're saying it's more important to get those words flowing first
Yes.
and then worry about the finer points of grammar later on.
Precisely. Think about how children learn their native language.
Okay.
They start by mimicking the sounds and patterns they hear around them,
Right?
gradually building their vocabulary and fluency.
Uh,
The grammatical rules come later, as they begin to analyze and understand the structure of the language.
it's like learning to ride a bike.
Exactly.
You don't start by studying the physics of balance and motion.
No.
You just hop on and start pedaling.
And as you become more comfortable with the language,
Right.
you can gradually incorporate grammar rules and refine your accuracy.
So it's a natural progression.
It is.
So while grammar is important,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be the primary focus in the early stages of language learning.
I wouldn't say so.
It's about finding that balance between fluency and accuracy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, making mistakes is part of the learning process.
Good point.
Don't be afraid to experiment with the language, even if you're not always grammatically perfect.
Okay.
The more you use English, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
That's a great message to leave our listeners with.
Embrace the journey, make those mistakes,
Yeah,
and most importantly, keep practicing.
absolutely.
And with the right approach and a bit of dedication,
Yeah.
you'll be amazed at how much progress you can make.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this segment,
We have.
delving deeper into the nuances of pronunciation
Right.
and addressing the role of grammar in language learning.
Two crucial aspects of fluency.
But we're not done yet.
Oh no, there's more to come.
Tomorrow, we'll be diving into day 2 of the 5-day fluency guide,
Can't wait.
where we'll explore techniques for overcoming those speaking jitters
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
and getting those English words flowing naturally.
We'll have lots to talk about.
We'll be talking about thinking in English, building vocabulary, and finding opportunities to practice speaking in real-life situations.
It's going to be great.
It sounds like we have a lot to look forward to.
We do.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
We hear it.
Think back to all the techniques and tips we've discussed today.
Right.
What's one thing you're going to implement starting right now?
That's a good question.
Are you going to try recording yourself speaking and identifying areas for improvement?
It's a good one.
Will you give shadowing a try?
Another great option.
Or maybe you'll challenge yourself to listen more actively to English content throughout the day.
That's a great idea.
Whatever it is, commit to making that change and see how it impacts your fluency journey.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Remember, even small steps can lead to big results over time. It's all about taking action and putting those strategies into practice, you know?
Yeah, you got to actually do the work.
That's so true. And as we move into day 2 and beyond,
Right.
we'll explore even more techniques for building fluency.
Definitely.
We'll delve into thinking in English, expanding vocabulary, and actually getting out there and practicing speaking in real-world situations.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
To actually use the language.
Exactly. But before we wrap up this deep dive into day 1,
Okay.
I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier.
What's that?
The idea that fluency isn't about perfection.
Oh, absolutely.
So many learners get so caught up, you know,
I know.
in this pursuit of flawless pronunciation and grammar
Right.
that they lose sight of the real purpose of language
Yeah.
communication.
Exactly.
It's like being so worried about hitting every note perfectly that you forget to just enjoy the music.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
And the truth is, even native speakers make mistakes.
All the time.
We stumble over words, mispronounce things.
Yeah.
Sometimes we struggle to articulate our thoughts.
It's part of being human.
So it's not about eliminating mistakes altogether,
Right.
but about not letting those mistakes
Yeah.
hold you back from expressing yourself.
Oh, got it.
And I imagine as you become more fluent,
Uh-huh.
those mistakes will naturally decrease over time.
For sure. The more you practice, the more confident and comfortable you'll become.
Right. And those little slip-ups
Yeah.
will become less and less frequent.
Exactly. It's a process.
It is.
And it's important to be patient with yourself along the way.
Patience is key, for sure.
It is. And remember to celebrate those small victories.
Oh, that's a good point.
Every time you use a new word or phrase successfully.
Yes.
Every time you understand a native speaker without having to ask them to repeat themselves.
It feels good.
Every time you feel a little bit more confident speaking.
Those are great examples.
Those are all reasons to celebrate.
Those are the moments that make the journey worthwhile.
They are.
They remind us why we're putting in the effort in the first place.
Absolutely. It's about connecting with others, sharing ideas, experiencing the world in a new way.
Well said. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
We've explored the importance of active listening, the power of shadowing, the nuances of pronunciation, the role of grammar in language learning.
That's a lot.
We even touched on embracing imperfection
Right.
and celebrating those small wins along the way.
Because those small wins add up.
They really do.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, right?
There's so much more to explore as we continue with the 5-Day Fluency Guide.
I can't wait to dive into day 2 and beyond. But for now, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay. I'm listening.
As you go about your day today,
Yeah.
pay attention to the sounds of English around you.
Okay.
Notice the rhythm, the intonation, the way native speakers use their voices to convey meaning.
Right.
Let those sounds just wash over you
I like that.
and allow yourself to absorb the music of the language.
It's all around us.
And if you're feeling brave,
Yeah.
try mimicking what you hear.
Oh, that's a good challenge.
You might be surprised at how much you can learn
I bet.
just by listening and imitating.
It's a powerful technique.
It's like a secret doorway to fluency hidden in plain sight,
I love that.
Yeah.
And the more you engage with the language, the more that door will swing open.
revealing a world of possibilities.
Exactly. So keep those ears open, keep those tongues practicing,
Yes.
and keep those minds engaged.
And remember, fluency isn't a destination.
It's not the end goal.
It's a journey. Enjoy the ride, everyone.